India is hosting the virtual summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization today. The summit of the SCO Council of Heads of State will be chaired by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Chinese President Xi Jinping and Pakistan Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif among the attendees. The theme of the summit is Secure SCO, and Iran is set to join the grouping. What will be the key areas of focus under India's presidency? There are also questions regarding Russia's growing influence. Are we witnessing a shift towards nations in Russia's zone of influence in the SCO? To discuss this, we have with us Dilip Sinha, former Indian permanent representative to the United Nations and former Indian ambassador. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. My first question to you, Prime Minister Modi to chair the virtual summit with Russian President Putin, Chinese President Xi Jinping and Pakistan Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, among others. What would be the key details on the agenda?
It appears that the issue that is top of the agenda of the summit is terrorism. Terrorism is an important item in SCO's cooperation, and one of the main outcomes of the SCO in all these years has been what's called the acronym RATS, the Regional Anti-Terror Structure, which was set up, and it seeks cooperation among the member states on curbing terrorism. So this appears to be the most important item on its agenda. There is also the idea that territorial integrity and sovereignty should be respected. But in terms of cooperation that's to be discussed, the main issue would be anti-terror cooperation.
Right, so in fact, I was just going to come to this. The SCO, it's mainly focused on regional security issues, like you mentioned, terrorism, separatism, extremism. This time the theme, as I mentioned earlier, is Secure SCO. What does that mean?
You see, the SCO was started in 1996 by China, essentially, in cooperation with Russia. And China's primary aim in setting up what was at that time the Shanghai Five was strategic. China still had border disputes with these Central Asian republics, and they had broken away from the Soviet Union. So China needed to set its relations with these countries on a certain kind of an even keel. It also wanted to reduce border tensions, reduce its military presence in these areas. So it set up the Shanghai Five along with Russia, and the three countries were Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan at that time. Uzbekistan wasn't initially a member because China had borders with these countries. And very soon after setting up the SCO signed two agreements. One was to reduce border tensions, and the other, a year later, was to reduce military presence. So this suited China because it was able to reduce its military presence in this area. And thereafter, China continued to take an interest in the region, because in Xinjiang, there is a lot of unrest among the Uyghurs. And many Uyghurs take shelter in Central Asia, and China regards them as terrorists. So China wants the cooperation of these countries to ensure that the Uyghurs, who are essentially freedom fighters in the region, do not find shelter in Central Asia. And China wants to cooperate with these countries. And that was the origin of RATS as an anti-terror structure. And that is what China is trying to pursue in the region. India's interests on terrorism are slightly different, and we have to see if we can get any of our interests on the table in this organization.
Absolutely, Ambassador. What's your take on Russia's rising influence? Is the SCO tilting towards nation within Russian zone of influence?
Well, Russia, these countries were part of the Soviet Union at one time. They broke away from the Soviet Union. And they became independent republics, but all their economic and cultural links were with Russia. Their elite spoke the Russian language. So when they became independent, they realized that they could not do without the Russian Federation. So they continued to have close links with this region. But later, as Russia's economy weakened and Russia was not able to meet their economic requirements, and China's economy, on the other hand, grew, and China became a major country in the region, with the capacity to invest in these countries, and also the growing strategic importance of these countries for China enabled these countries to turn to China. And in China's BRI, the Border Roads Initiative, Central Asia plays a very critical role because China started this rail link from China to Germany. all across Central Asia. It invested huge amounts of money in the region. Now, of course, because of the Ukraine war, that dream has been shattered. But China still believes that Central Asia is extremely important for it because as tension rises in the Indo-Pacific, China wants to import oil from the Middle East directly across land. And that's where Iran's importance comes in, because Iran is the key link here. So once Iran joins SCO, then the land link from across the Middle East to China will be complete, and China will start working on ensuring that the oil that it imports from the Middle East does not have to face the risks of going through the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea.
Right, sir. In fact, I was just going to come to this as well. India's presidency is set to welcome Iran as a new permanent member of the grouping. Just for more clarity here, you've already mentioned this. What's your take on this?
Well, for India, the importance of Iran is that India had expected that by joining the SCO, it would be able to perhaps persuade Pakistan to give transit. Now, Pakistan has refused to give transit to India under any of the international agreements that it has signed, either in SAFTA or in GATT or other agreements. So India has practically given up hope that within the SCO format, it can expect any kind of transit from Pakistan. Now the expectation is that the Chabahar route, the North-South corridor, develops, then perhaps India will get easier access to Central Asia. That unfortunately has not happened. And India hopes that with Iran joining the SCO, the cooperation increasing among these countries, perhaps this might ease and facilitate the route of Chabahar for India's access to Central Asia, because that is India's biggest problem in promoting trade with Central Asian republics.
Right, Ambassador. Now the summit is also taking place against the backdrop of over 3-year Ladakh standoff between Indian and Chinese troops. What can you tell us about that?
Well, India-China relations are at a low point. India has made it clear that all other relations will be kept on hold until China eases tension on the border. Now, that China has refused. China still wants that the border issues which should be separated from other areas of cooperation. So right now there's an impasse in our relations, and I don't think the SCO will be able to resolve this impasse. At the same time, Russia's position also has become extremely difficult because of the Ukraine war and President Putin's inability to travel out of Moscow, which is why this summit is being held virtually, because President Putin has not traveled outside Russia this year at all, except to the Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine. So he's hesitant to come to India, which is why this summit is being held virtually. But both these factors, the India-China relations being on hold, and Russia's position generally in Asia and the world being in a difficult position, President Putin's own position in Moscow is now shaky. In view of all these factors, the SCO summit has become essentially a formality which has to be completed.
Right, so that being said, what's your take on the role that these nations play in global governance and ensuring peace and security in the international realm?
I don't think the SCO has much of a role to play in that, because within the SCO itself, there are many contradictions. I just mentioned the contradiction between India and China. India and Pakistan is very well known. China and Russia, of course, have moved closer today because of various factors. But there's very little value sharing. Even on terrorism, India's main concerns on terrorism emanate from Pakistan and from the support that China gives to Pakistan. Like, for example, in designating Pakistan-based terrorists in the UN Security Council, it is China that supports Pakistan and ensures and protects its terrorists. So even on the key issue of terrorism, the cooperation within the SCO is limited to what China wants, which is to control the Uyghur separatists and their activities in Central Asia. So apart from this, trade is not an important item on the SCO's agenda. There's no trade agreement among these countries. So all in all, the level of cooperation within the SCO is extremely limited, and India's expectations of the SCO and what it expected when it became a member, they have been essentially belied.
All right. Ambassador, also something that you mentioned earlier, this will be President Putin's first participation in a multilateral summit since the attempted Wagner mutiny in the backdrop of the war in Ukraine. How do you assess Russia's participation?
Russia's participation will be essentially perfunctory because President Putin's main concern right now is domestic, and externally it is the Ukraine war, there are the sanctions. So there are all kinds of issues within Russia. I don't think Russia is in a position to do very much in terms of seeking cooperation with the other SCO members, other than to project that it is not as isolated as the West would like it to be, that Russia still has friends who are prepared to talk to it, to meet with it. So that is the only projection that Russia can hope for at the moment in the SCO, and that outcome itself will be of some significance for Russia.
Right, sir. That being said, under India's presidency, what will be or should be India's priorities and goals going forward?
India's goals should be to ensure that within the SCO, the RATS organization also starts focusing on the terror concerns that India has. And if Pakistan is a member of the SCO as it is, then it should abide by its commitments to the anti-terror commitments it has made in the SCO. And that should be as important on the SCO agenda as is China's concern of the Uyghur separatists.
All right. Well, Ambassador Dilip Sinha, thank you so much for joining us on WION with your inputs and insights on this.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.